Convoy to USP Florence High. Inside Colorado's high-security prison exposed. This is a true crime documentary, not fiction. Blood on the yard. Before we dive into this case of power, betrayal, and murder inside Colorado's high-security fortress, make sure you're subscribed, hit the like button, and leave a comment, because what you're about to hear is one of the darkest chapters in America's prison history. The sun rose over Fremont County as a pale disk behind a curtain of spring dust. To the west, the Sangre de Cristo Mountains loomed blue and jagged. To the east, an ocean of barbed wire glittered like frost. Just off Highway 67 sat the Florence Federal Correctional Complex, a sprawl of beige concrete boxes ringed by double fences and motion sensors. At its heart was the Supermax, ADX Florence, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. But today's story begins next door at its lesser-known sibling, USP Florence High. Florence High was designed to hold 1,500 of the most dangerous federal inmates, gang shot callers, contract killers, men who had burned every bridge in the Bureau of Prisons. On paper it was high security, a step below the Supermax. In reality it was a pressure cooker. Inmates called it Gladiator School, a place where politics, grudges, and violence simmered until they boiled over. It was here, on a windy March afternoon in 2008, that a quiet showdown erupted into one of the deadliest incidents in modern federal prison history. Just after noon count, the recreation yard opened. Inside its high concrete walls, clusters of men drifted toward the pull-up bars or paced along the outer track. From a tower above, a correctional officer scanned the scene with binoculars. He'd been briefed that morning about rising tension between two groups, members of the Serenos and a smaller set from the DC Blacks. Intelligence had flagged possible retaliation for an assault weeks earlier in the Chow Hall. No weapons were supposed to be on the yard. Yet every veteran staffer knew how easily a shank could be hidden inside a sneaker or taped under a bench. Among the crowd was 32-year-old Manuel Listo Lopez, a quiet but feared enforcer who'd been transferred from California's Victorville after stabbing a rival in the eye. Lopez had a new target, at least according to the kite intercepted by SAS, Special Investigative Services, the day before. The intended victim was a stocky man in his mid-20s, known in paperwork only as inmate JL. He was serving a decade for federal weapons charges but had racked up enemies by refusing to check in with any gang. To some, he was a rogue. To others, he was a loose end. At 12:34 p.m., cameras caught Lopez and another inmate walking slowly behind JL as he jogged past the handball court. Witnesses later told investigators they saw a glint, homemade metal pulled from a mop wringer. Within seconds the yard erupted. Lopez lunged first, plunging a 6-inch shank into JL's lower back. His partner came from the side, slashing at JL's neck. JL collapsed near the pull-up bars as blood spattered across the cracked concrete. Correctional officers hit their alarms. Sirens wailed. The tower guard raised his rifle and barked orders through a bullhorn. But the attack was fast and frenzied. Before the yard could be cleared, JL had been stabbed more than 20 times. Two other inmates joined the melee, not to defend JL but to shield the attackers, blocking officers from getting close. By the time the responding team fired pepper balls and flashbangs, the damage was done. Paramedics rushed through the sally port with a stretcher. JL's eyes were open but glassy. His skin had turned the color of wet cement. Inmates shouted in Spanish and English, some cheering, some cursing. Officers pinned Lopez to the ground, his hands slick with blood. The second attacker dropped his weapon and lay flat, panting. Both men were cuffed and dragged away. For staff inside Florence High, violence was nothing new. In the preceding 2 years, the prison had logged dozens of assaults, some so brutal they drew quiet visits from Washington. But this killing, in broad daylight, under watchtowers and cameras, was a gut punch. How had two inmates smuggled weapons onto a yard searched minutes before? How had intelligence failed? And who exactly was the real target? The FBI's Denver field office dispatched 2 agents that evening. One of them, Special Agent Dana Kearns, had spent years chasing gang conspiracies in New Mexico. The other, a younger analyst named Travis Cole, specialized in mapping inmate communications. Together they arrived at Florence under a sky streaked with orange and ash. They were met at the gate by Lieutenant Mark Renner, the prison's grim-faced operations chief. "Welcome to our headache," Renner said as he led them through security. His voice echoed off concrete. "You're looking at a murder we saw coming but couldn't stop." Kearns studied the surveillance stills in her folder. Lopez's face was clear, but the second attacker wore a knit cap low over his brow. "We'll need all the kites, call logs, and video from the past month," she said. "Already boxed up," Renner replied. But there's something else. He lowered his voice as they approached the control center. 2 days before the hit, Lopez got a legal visit. Same lawyer who represents a Nuestra Familia capo at ADX. Coincidence? Inside the control room, screens flickered with real-time feeds from the compound. The rec yard now stood empty, raked by spotlights. Evidence techs bagged bloody clothing under the gaze of a forensic camera. Kearns felt a chill, not from the cold but from the sense of a chessboard where pieces moved under invisible hands. In interviews later that night, Lopez refused to talk. "Lawyer," he said, smirking. His partner said nothing at all. Both were placed in the SHU, solitary confinement, pending transfer to ADX. But a strange thing happened as soon as they were moved. Their associates on the yard went quiet. No retaliation, no boasting. As if someone had flipped a switch. Agent Cole dug through intercepted mail. One letter from a known gang lieutenant contained a cryptic line. "The freight moved as planned. Next stop, Max." Another, written in pencil on legal paper, read, "He wouldn't play ball. Now he's gone. You're up." What freight? What plan? And why did the killing feel more like a message than a feud? Kearns began to suspect that JL hadn't been the only target, or even the main one. She learned that the week before his death, JL had been questioned by SIS about contraband cell phones smuggled in through a food service contractor. He'd agreed to a second interview but never showed. Was he cooperating? Did someone inside know? 2 nights after the stabbing, a corrections officer found a note taped under a bench in the chapel. Written in tiny block letters, it said, "Silence buys peace. Talk buys a coffin." It was inside. Cameras showed only a blurred shape slipping in and out of the chapel minutes before evening count. By then the Bureau of Prisons had ordered an emergency lockdown. All movements suspended. All visits cancelled. Yet somehow rumors leaked to local reporters. Another Florence High murder tied to gangs, security failures, questions about oversight. The warden held a brief press conference, promising a full investigation. No one mentioned that Lopez had been on a short list for transfer to ADX. Until now. Kearns met with the warden the next morning. If Lopez was headed to Supermax, she said, "Why kill a guy days before you leave? Unless someone told him he wasn't going after all." The warden rubbed his temples. "We're getting heat from DC. They want answers yesterday." Kearns stared out the window at the distant razor wire of ADX, gleaming under a rising sun. She'd spent her career tracing conspiracies in neighborhoods and prisons alike. But Florence High felt different, like a staging ground for something larger, a hidden economy of favors, hits, and transfers. Each killing a transaction, each inmate a currency. At 10:17 a.m. her phone buzzed. It was Agent Cole from the evidence room. "You're going to want to see this," he said. Minutes later she stood over a table where Cole had spread out confiscated envelopes. One bore a faint stamp of a dragon and star, a symbol linked to a West Coast syndicate. Inside was a single Polaroid. It showed JL alive, seated at a metal table in the visiting room. Across from him sat a man in a tailored suit whose face was mostly hidden by a newspaper. On the back of the photo someone had scrawled a date, March 14th, the day before the murder. "That visitor doesn't match any of our logs," Cole said. "No name, no ID. And look at the corner." He pointed to a sliver of another figure reflected in the glass partition, a uniformed staffer. This wasn't just a visit. It was staged. Kearns felt a cold weight settle in her stomach. If the photo was real, someone with access had smuggled in a camera, arranged a meeting and marked a man for death, all under the Bureau's nose. And then Cole handed her a second Polaroid just arrived from the lab. This one showed Lopez days earlier, walking out of a storage room with a small black duffel bag. The caption on the back, in the same block letters as the chapel note, read, "Next stop, Max." "What is in that bag?" Kearns whispered. "Unconfirmed," Cole said. "But we found metal filings in the floor drain." Before Kearns could reply, an alarm sounded down the hall, a shrill, rising wail. The control room door burst open. A sergeant shouted, "Ma'am, we've got another incident in the SHU." Kearns looked at Cole. His face had gone pale. They grabbed their badges and ran. In the distance, beyond the heavy doors, another secret was breaking loose inside Florence High. Shadows in the SHU. The siren's wail carried through the corridor like a blade, cutting through the muffled hum of fluorescent lights. Agent Dana Kearns sprinted behind Lieutenant Renner as doors clanged open and shut ahead of them. The security housing unit, the SHU, lay in the prison's north wing, a block of windowless cells where sound seemed to die in midair. Here the most disruptive inmates were locked down 23 hours a day, their movements reduced to shackles and slots. It was supposed to be the safest part of Florence High. Yet now another emergency had erupted behind its steel doors. A guard met them at the entrance, his face slick with sweat. "Cell 213, he said. "Inmate down. Blood everywhere." His voice cracked on the last word. Kearns and Cole followed Renner down the narrow tier, the smell of disinfectant and iron heavy in the air. They passed rows of gray doors, each with a small glass window like a dark eye. Inmates banged fists on the metal, shouting fragments of slang, curses, and prayers. At the end of the tier, 2 medical officers knelt beside a man slumped on the floor of his cell. He was alive, barely, his orange jumpsuit soaked dark at the chest. A makeshift blade, sharpened from a piece of HVAC duct, lay inches from his hand. Renner crouched. "Who is he?" "Carlos Vega," the guard said. "One of Lopez's crew." Kearns scanned the scene. No one else had been in the cell. Vega was supposed to be on single-man status. "How does a man on isolation get stabbed?" she asked. "We're still figuring that out," Renner muttered. "He was screaming 10 minutes ago. When we got here he was like this." Paramedics lifted Vega onto a stretcher. His eyes fluttered open just long enough to lock on Kearns. "Too deep," he whispered, a smear of blood at the corner of his mouth. "It goes too deep." Then he slipped under. As they wheeled him away, Cole picked up the blade with gloved fingers. "No fingerprints," he said. "Wiped clean." Kearns stared at the empty cell. On the wall above the bunk someone had scratched a crude drawing. A freight train rushing into a tunnel, a skull on its engine. Below it, in faint pencil, 3 words, "Next stop, Max." She felt a shiver. "It's the same hand," she said. "Whoever killed Vega wanted us to see this." They left the SHU and gathered in the control room. Renner slammed his palm on the table. "We're on total lockdown now. No rec, no chapel, no nothing until we flush this out." Cole opened his laptop. "I've been mapping movement data. Lopez, Vega, and 2 other inmates all worked the food service line last month. All had access to supply rooms." Kearns leaned over his shoulder. "Including the duffel bag." "Exactly. And here's the kicker," he tapped a chart. "Every one of those men was scheduled for review by the classification team this week. 3 were candidates for transfer to ADX. Renner frowned. "So someone's fast-tracking them. Kill a rival, make enough noise, get shipped out of here. Or," Kearns said quietly, "someone on the outside wants them at ADX for another reason." The implication hung heavy in the air. ADX Florence was the end of the line, a labyrinth of single-man cells and perpetual lockdown. But it also housed some of the most valuable informants and gang leaders in federal custody. If a rival faction could insert its own soldiers there under the guise of discipline, it could gain access few ever achieved. Cole pulled up another document. "Remember JL? He wasn't a gang member, but he was about to testify about a contraband cell phone network. Guess who ran that network? Vega, Lopez, and a contractor named Hawkins." Renner's eyes narrowed. "Hawkins? Food service supervisor," Cole said. "No criminal record on paper. But he's got a brother doing time in California for trafficking. We think Hawkins was paid to move items in and out." Kearns felt the edges of a puzzle clicking together, but the image was darker than she'd feared. A corrupt contractor, gang enforcers, a dead potential witness, and now a wounded insider. And threaded through it all the cryptic phrase, "Next stop, Max." She stood. "I want Hawkins brought in now." Renner hesitated. "He's already gone. Called in sick this morning. Left town." "Where?" "According to HR, he's visiting family in Pueblo." Kearns grabbed her jacket. "We're going." 2 hours later they found Hawkins' house, a low-slung ranch on the edge of town. A rusted pickup sat in the driveway, dust caked on the windshield. No answer at the door. Kearns circled to the back where a shed leaned against the fence. The padlock hung open. Inside, among lawn tools and paint cans, sat a stack of prison-issued duffel bags. Cole opened one. Inside lay rolls of duct tape, gloves, and several sealed manila envelopes. Each was labeled with an inmate number and a date. One bore Lopez's number. Another bore Vega's. A third, dated for the following week, bore a name Kearns didn't recognize, R. Navarro. Cole's voice was tight. "Navarro's at Florence High right now. SHU Block 2. He's on the same transfer list." Kearns flipped through the envelopes. The contents were mostly legal papers, but at the bottom of the box she found something else. A cheap flip phone with a cracked screen. She powered it on. One message blinked. Train moves tomorrow. Confirm. She looked at Cole. Tomorrow, she said. They're going to hit Navarro tomorrow. They raced back to Florence as dusk bled across the plains. The complex rose out of the earth like a fortress, its towers black against the fading light. Inside, the mood was brittle. Inmates had been locked down all day, tension coiling like a spring. Guards patrolled in pairs, radios hissing with static. Kearns and Cole went straight to the warden's office. Navarro needs to be moved tonight, Kearns said. If we don't, he's dead by morning. The warden frowned. Moved where? We're at capacity. And transfers have to be cleared by DC. Then put him in protective custody. Whatever it takes. I'll see what I can do. But even as he spoke, an alarm blared from the SHU. Another incident. Another emergency. They ran. In the dim corridor outside Block 2, officers had formed a cordon. Through the window of cell 209, Kearns saw a man sprawled on the floor, Navarro. His face was pale, his lips moving without sound. On the wall above him, in fresh blood, someone had scrawled a single phrase, Max is home. Cole's stomach turned. How? The cameras, an officer said. Blacked out for 3 minutes. We don't know who went in. Kearns pressed her hand to the glass, watching Navarro's chest rise and fall. He was still alive, barely. She turned to Renner. Lock everything. Nobody moves, nobody leaves. Renner keyed his radio. All units, freeze movement. But even as the order echoed through the facility, a new voice came over the radio, calm, almost amused. Too late. The freight's already rolling. The channel went dead. Kearns felt a chill sweep up her spine. Someone inside Florence High had access not just to weapons, but to the very systems meant to control them. Someone was playing a larger game, and she and Cole were already behind the clock. As medics rushed Navarro out, Kearns noticed a slip of paper clenched in his fist. She pried it free. On it was a crude map of Florence High, marked with an X at a storage room near the loading dock. The same area Lopez had been photographed leaving with the duffel bag. She met Cole's eyes. That's where it starts, she said. But before they could move, the lights flickered, then went out, plunging the corridor into darkness. Freight to the Supermax. Darkness swallowed the corridor like a closing fist. Emergency beacons flickered once, twice, then steadied to a dull red glow. The air smelled of ozone and sweat. Agent Dana Kearns drew a slow breath and steadied her pulse. Somewhere down the tier, Navarro's gurney wheels squeaked against the concrete as medics pushed him toward the exit. In the crimson light, the prison felt less like a fortress and more like a maze. Cole clicked his flashlight on. Backup power's out in this wing, he said, voice low. That's not supposed to happen. Renner barked orders into his radio, but the line hissed with static. We're blind and deaf, he muttered. Kearns glanced at the map she'd pried from Navarro's fist. The X marked a storage room by the loading dock, the same area from the Polaroid of Lopez with the duffel bag. That's where they're moving, she said. If someone's staging a transfer, it's happening now. They moved quickly through the dim halls, past rows of locked doors where inmates shouted in confusion. In the control room, 2 monitors still flickered with grainy feeds. One showed the loading dock doors rolled halfway open. A box truck backed in, its logo stenciled with the name of a legitimate food service vendor. In the red glow, Kearns saw 2 men in maintenance uniforms lifting crates onto a dolly. Renner frowned. We don't have any scheduled deliveries at night. Then someone's using the blackout, Kearns said. We have to get down there. They descended a stairwell into the belly of the prison. The air grew cooler, damp with the smell of concrete and oil. At the end of a corridor, a single bulb swung on its wire. Beyond it, the loading dock yawned like an open throat. Kearns signaled to Cole. They slipped behind a stack of pallets. On the dock floor, a maintenance worker crouched over a duffel bag, unzipping it. Inside glinted strips of metal and plastic, improvised restraints, cell phone parts, and what looked like a correctional officer's uniform folded neatly. Cole whispered, They're not just smuggling contraband. They're smuggling people. The worker stood and peeled off his mask. It wasn't a maintenance man at all. It was Hawkins, the food service supervisor who was supposed to be in Pueblo. His eyes darted to a figure emerging from the truck, a tall man with a shaved head and the calm posture of someone used to command. Kearns recognized him from a wanted bulletin. Rafael Navarro's brother, an enforcer for a cartel cell in New Mexico, never before caught inside a prison. Hawkins spoke softly, but the words carried in the cavernous space. He's prepped. Paperwork's clean. Once we're inside Max, we'll have everything we need. Navarro's brother nodded. And the witness? Taken care of. Bleeding out right now. Kern's stomach tightened. They weren't moving goods to ADX. They were moving a man, a high-value cartel operative, into the Supermax disguised as a disciplinary transfer. Once inside, he could access rival leaders, silence informants, or coordinate operations from the most secure prison in the country. It was infiltration under the Bureau's nose. She and Cole stepped out from behind the pallets, badges raised. Federal agents. Drop it. Hawkins froze. Navarro's brother's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then he lunged for the duffel bag. A metal blade flashed in his hand. Cole grabbed Kearns and Dove as the blade clanged off a steel post. Renner's team burst through the door behind them, weapons drawn. Hands up, he shouted. Navarro's brother swung the blade in a wide arc, forcing the officers back. He bolted toward the open truck. Hawkins scrambled after him. Kearns sprinted, slamming her shoulder into Hawkins and knocking him to the ground. The phone he'd used to coordinate the operation skittered across the floor. Cole cut off Navarro's brother at the loading dock edge. The man slashed once, grazing Cole's arm, but Cole held his ground. Renner fired a beanbag round that struck the attacker in the chest, knocking him off balance. Kearns lunged, tackling him. The blade clattered away. Alarms wailed as more staff swarmed the dock. Hawkins was cuffed. Navarro's brother spat curses as officers dragged him away. The truck driver lay prone, hands over his head. Kearns stood, chest heaving. Around her, the loading dock looked like a stage after a storm. Crates toppled, papers scattered, red lights still pulsing. In her hand she held Hawkins' phone. On the screen a final message glowed. Freight delivered. Next stop, Max. Hours later, in a secure interview room, Hawkins began to talk. The plan had been months in the making. Cartel money had bought his cooperation. Gang intermediaries inside Florence High had done the rest. JL had been marked because he'd agreed to inform on the contraband cell phone network. Vega had been silenced because he'd tried to back out. Navarro's brother had planned to slip into ADX under a false identity, eliminate a rival leader, and assume control of a lucrative smuggling route through the prison system itself. As dawn broke over Fremont County, Kearns sat on a bench outside the complex. Beyond the fences, ADX Florence glinted in the morning light, an austere cube of concrete and silence. She thought of the men inside, of how even the world's most secure prison could be manipulated from the shadows. Cole joined her, his arm bandaged. "We stopped one train," he said quietly. "But how many more are rolling?" Kearns looked at the phone in her hand, at the endless stream of coded messages, aliases, and shifting loyalties. She knew the case was far from over. The Bureau would make arrests, tighten protocols, announce reforms. But someone, somewhere, would be planning the next move. The system was a chessboard and the pieces never stopped moving. She turned to the camera crew waiting for her outside the gates. "This is what people don't understand," she said softly. "Even in the highest security, secrets move faster than locks. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one." Behind her, the sirens of Florence faded into the wind. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains stood cold and blue on the horizon. And in the deepest cells of America's most notorious prisons, whispers of the freight still moved, planning, waiting, ready for another journey to the Supermax.